Good morning, everyone. My name's Camille. I am going to be doing a presentation on Zoom and in person, so forgive me if my attention's one way or the other. I'm going to try to get to everybody. I have been here at the nursery for, this is my fourth year. I've been doing beekeeping for almost as long, so in the beekeeping world, I'm still a novice, but I do have quite a bit of knowledge, which I'd like to share with everyone today. Class is basically going to be the benefits of beekeeping, why you would want to be a beekeeper, why you would be able to share this information with others, a brief history of beekeeping, which does apply to beekeeping today. You're going to be able to look at history and go, oh, hey, this is why I do this today. So always a good idea to take a look at how we got to be here, why bees are in trouble, how you can help. This is kind of a loaded question, so we'll try and not stay on that topic too long. When and how to begin, we're going to be talking about costs of getting started, where you should start, what equipment you're going to need, that sort of thing. Hive composition, placement, and terminology. This is probably the longest portion of the class, so I'm going to go a little bit quickly. Please let me know if you've got any questions. I'll be looking at the chat window for those of you on Zoom, and I will be looking for hands in the crowd as well. So feel free to stop me and I'll be happy to elaborate. I'm going to be talking about frames in a different section here because it is confusing when you're talking about hive boxes and frames. So I kind of separated that there. Beekeeping tools and apparel, the absolute necessities versus fun things or convenient things to have around. When you're first getting started, start with the essentials, work into what you would like to do later. Social organization of bees, who is what in the hive and what do they do, sort of thing. Bee breeds, you're all looking at European honeybees, but there are several different breeds with different personalities. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And procuring the bees, how are you going to get your bees? Are you going to get them in a package, a nuke, a swarm, this sort of thing? And then additional resources. So don't just learn from me. Take it into your own hands, get all sorts of cool resources, talk to your peers, that sort of thing. All right, so let's get going here. So benefits of beekeeping, the one everyone's most familiar with is probably honey and pollination. So about 70% of the food we consume does need to be pollinated. There are things out there that are wind pollinated or self-pollinated, but even self-fertile trees can benefit from the pollination of honeybees. Take blueberries, for example. Blueberries have small flowers, so the honeybees have a bit of a hard time getting to them, but they will increase the yield if they're going to visit the flowers. Honey, delicious in treats, mead, June, honey butter, all sorts of different things. Also a wonderful lubricant for conversations with neighbors. Wax has a lot of different uses, but we're not really going to talk about that in today's class because it gets very long and very messy. Talk about beekeeping first. You want to still do wax next year, try wax next year. Propolis is something you're going to be dealing with throughout your beekeeping experience. It's going to be a nightmare, but it's also going to be a blessing. Propolis is essentially bee glue. So it's kind of a sappy substance that the bees mix with their own saliva. They'll take it from tree sap, they'll take it from any sticky substance in the environment, and they'll use it to seal all of the spaces in their hive. So your hive tool is going to help you pop open your hive and unglue all of your hive components. Propolis is going to be an interesting experience. But throughout, you're going to be learning so much. You're going to never have a bored day in your life again. So let's get into a brief history of beekeeping. Beekeeping is older than dirt. When bee husbandry, we're moving through slides here. So early humans, back in the cradle of civilization, began as robbers of bee nests. They would take honey brewed in wax as food, drink, medicine, and even currency. Normally, this early, they're not really considering the health of the bees. They're more considering resources for themselves. So this isn't really animal husbandry. This is more of a robbing thing. The earliest records of human interactions with bees date back to 8,000 to 6,000 BC in rock paintings. You'll see the top one is in Spain, the bottom one is in Zimbabwe, one of the first instances of people using smoke to control the bees. Domestication dates back to at least 970 BC. This photo down here is from Tel Rehav in Israel. The apiary is kind of hard to count because, as you can see, it's sun-dried mud, so they do decay after a while. But this apiary had 75 to 200 cylindrical hives. So this is something we're going to come back to quite often in the class. When bee husbandry began, people realized that bees will live in basically anything. So they're using the cheapest material, the most abundant material of the region. Gums are used. That's essentially just a bee tree that people found, cut the tree down, moved it back to the village. The bees had nested in the tree before, they continue to nest in the tree. So they moved this tree called a gum now into the village. Sun-dried mud, as you saw in Tel Rehav, fired clay, reed baskets insulated with mud or dung, wood like our current Langstroth hives. You can use just about anything to make a bee nest. Throughout the centuries, bees have been used for direct resource collection, honey, propolis, wax, pollination, and even warfare. The warfare is kind of the interesting part. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I found it fun. Along the Black Sea, there is a very high concentration of rhododendrons, and the honey can actually be poisonous. Not worried about it here. There's not enough rhododendrons to make a difference. Rhododendrons are fine to have in your yard. But along the Black Sea, mad honey has actually put a stop to multiple armies. So kind of fun to read up on that history. Skeps, the reed baskets, insulated with mud or dung. It's the kind of iconic honeybee hive that you see in little icons here and there. Those were used in the Middle Ages as booby traps around castle gates. You'd have the skeps lined up around the gate. They're rigged so if the gate falls, all the honeybees fall over. Suddenly your enemies are attacked by honeybees, and well, you've got a little bit of extra time on your hands. Movable frame hives are somewhat of a new thing, considering the history we've been talking about here. They had been experimented in years previous. L.O. Langstroth is not the only one to have started out on this journey, but he has kind of perfected it. So L.L. Langstroth is kind of the grandfather of beekeeping, and the Langstroth hive is the most widely used hive used today. He patented the movable frame hive with regards to bee space, or 3/8 of an inch, in 1852. So where are bees found today? They are found in nature. If you see them in a tree trunk, it's going to be a living tree trunk. They always go to living trees, normally hardwoods. This is an awesome place to find them. Leave them alone, they're doing their thing. Every now and then you'll see them on tree branches here. This isn't such a good thing to see. Normally, if you see open wax on a tree in this area, it's kind of a death sentence for them. They haven't found a good place to nest. They've just set up shop here. Beekeepers will normally come and take these and rescue them and put them in their own hives. In the backyard, this is what we're going to be focusing on today. Most of you are going to be backyard beekeepers, couple hives in the backyard, couple hives in the pasture, that sort of thing. These hives are usually in pretty close proximity to each other, and they're usually pretty low to the ground. So there are some special considerations to take as far as robbing and predators and things like that. But it's also nice because most backyard beekeepers keep a pretty good eye on their hives. I see mine every single day because they literally are in my backyard. And they're also found in commercial operations. Not exactly a pretty picture, but it's a necessary one. There's intense management, lots of pallets and power equipment, absolutely zero spacing. But without the commercial guys, the hobbyists would be dead in the water. The commercial guys provide all of our packages and nukes. They provide pollination services throughout the country. They are an absolute essential part of beekeeping. And my mentor's a commercial guy. So why bees are in trouble? The nature of their foraging habits makes them extremely susceptible to pesticides. On a large scale, this can be difficult to control, but on a small scale, it's really easy. So you can do your part by not spraying any pesticides in anything that's currently flowering. If it's not in flower, it's safe. If it is in flower, either remove the flowers or protect the flowers with little baggies before you spray. Just make sure that no pesticides end up on flower petals, because that's where the bees are going to be. Commercial pollination spreads pests and diseases, particularly varroa mites. There are a lot of crops that are essential to be pollinated in a very small amount of time. Take the almonds, for example. In February, you have beekeepers from all across the entire nation coming to California for 2 weeks and then going back home after they've had their 2-week party of varroa and disease, giant chickenpox party, essentially. So it's really important to keep up on your disease management, because it's just here. There's no getting around it. Urbanization and changes of agriculture can lead to loss of reliable forage. Monocropping is definitely a problem for honeybees. You've got a honeybee hive surrounded by just miles and miles and miles of a single crop. You're going to really have some trouble, because the single crop is going to flower, it's going to be done, and you're really going to need to feed. Luckily, in urban areas, it's actually pretty easy to keep your bees fed and keep a varied diet, because so many people, especially in this area, are concerned with native flowers, native plants. They've got a really great biodiversity in their yards. So this can be actually easier than if you were in more of a rural setting. How you can help. Actually really happy with this slide. I just made it this morning. So don't just listen to me. I would like to give everyone a foundation for their beekeeping, but branch out, go to all sorts of different sources. Beekeeping is a trade built on the collective wisdom and knowledge of generations, and it can't be learned in a day or even a decade. The guys who've been out there doing it for 50, 60 years, they'll tell you, hey, I learned something new today. So you never really stop learning. How I can contribute outside the hive. Learn as much as you possibly can, have a good solid foundation of knowledge and continue building upon that. Use books, periodicals, peers, mentors. Be careful with online resources, because beekeeping is an ever-changing field and there's a lot of wrong information out there. So find a couple people who you can really rely upon and start following them if you're going to be online. Keeping good notes is absolutely imperative with beekeeping. When you're going out to the hive, you're doing your hive inspections, keep really good notes so that you know what's going on in the hive, you know what's changing from visit to visit. Notes are completely variable. Lots of different people keep lots of different tabs on different things. So note the weather. Is it windy? Is it cold? Is it slightly rainy? You shouldn't be getting in the hive, but what's the weather like? What's the wind like? Take a look at the bees from the outside before you even get into the hive. Are they calm? Are they a whole bunch of them out at the entrance? Just know what's going on and write it down, because 2 months hence, you're not going to remember if it was a rainy day and that hive inspection or not. How I can be responsible in the hive. Apply your knowledge to gently work your hive. Make sure, especially if you're really urban, your bees aren't becoming a nuisance to neighbors. Know when to inspect, know when to put the hive back together again and wait a couple minutes. You want to work your hive at least once every 2 weeks. That way you know exactly what's going on in the hive. You can stop swarming in that case. 2 weeks is a really good number, because it takes the queen 2 weeks and about a day to hatch from an egg. And to prevent swarming, you need to prevent additional queens from emerging. So once every 2 weeks, you should be able to catch those queens from hatching. You want to keep a good pest management schedule for varroa. Like I said, varroa is present is going to be present in just about every hive, especially if you are an urban beekeeper. Know when and how to feed and provide water sources. If you're not providing water sources, they're going to find water sources elsewhere, which could be in a neighbor's pool. So water sources are really important when it comes to having a hive. And did I miss anything here? Ah, yes, we're going to get to this at a later slide as well, but learn from your peers, get a couple beekeeping friends, attend meetings at local beekeeping associations. I'm a member of Lynn Benton Beekeepers Association. They meet about once a month, and they've got some excellent speakers, so always a good learning experience. When and how to begin. It's kind of daunting at first, but once you jump in, you really kind of get the hang of it. There is no substitute for raw experience. So learn as much as you can, and then you'll learn once you're inside the hive as well. So consider cost and start early. Beekeeping is a very financially demanding hobby, and it's important to do some research, set a manageable budget, and just kind of go at it little at a time. Upfront costs are usually a lot higher than maintenance costs, but there are maintenance costs as well, as far as bee feed, replacement parts, extra hives if you need a split, that sort of thing. Varroa management is not super cheap, but it's not too bad either. Let's see, consider buying set amounts of bee equipment each month. Say your hive skeleton 1 month, just your boxes, the outside. The frames the next month, then your suit, your gloves, your smoker, that sort of thing. You do want to have your setup complete and painted by the time bees arrive, and that's usually April, May, depending on if you're getting packages or nukes. So this is a very general slide right here. It's going to change because beekeeping is incredibly weather dependent. We're all meteorologists here. You didn't just sign up for beekeeping. I didn't tell you this before, but you're also going to have to be a junior meteorologist. In winter, we're still in winter here. This is going to be sometime November through April. Basically, when it's cold, it's wet, temperatures are consistently below 55 degrees daytime. You're going to use this time not to get into the hive because it's too cold or too wet. You're going to build and repair your bee equipment. You're going to watch for emergency feeding scenarios. Every now and then in winter, you get a warm day. I think it was about 2 weeks ago, I was actually wearing shorts, so I was able to get out and able to actually feed. Few and far between, so keep an eye on the weather. Expand your beekeeping knowledge with a good book, attend your beekeeping meetings, just stay informed throughout the winter because there's not much work to do in the hive. And the most important thing is if you are getting newbies, whether you had a dead out from the year before or you're just getting started, order your bees in winter. Pre-orders generally start around January and usually go until a couple of weeks before the actual pickup day. So pre-ordering is best to do it as early as possible. Once you get into April and May, this is kind of the beginning of the beekeeping year for us. You're going to install your bee packages, install your nukes, catch your swarms, feed your colonies, and begin your hive inspections. So sometime in April and May, you're going to get pretty consistent with your 2-week hive inspections. You're going to treat for Varroa, and as your colonies begin to grow, you're going to add additional boxes as need be. Getting into May and June. Question?
Sorry to interrupt. Treating for Varroa in the spring, is that if you already have an established colony from the previous winter, or if you have a new, would you still treat them?
That's a good question. Okay, so you are going to need to treat your hive regardless, whether it's a new install or if it's a surviving hive. Like I said, bees have got Varroa. That's pretty much the end of the story there.
Okay.
If you have overwintered hive versus new hive, the timing is going to be a little bit different, but you're going to need to treat in the spring regardless.
Okay.
Getting into May and June, we're going to be adding honey supers, keeping an eye on resources. Once the blackberries begin to bloom in this area, that's the start of the biggest honey flow of the year. Blackberries bloom, you're getting your honey. So keep an eye on the blackberries, and that's really going to be your gauge for honey supering. When you have your honey supers on, your honey supers are the box just for your honey. Your bees have their boxes below, you have your honey super above. So you want to stop your supplemental feeding at that point. If you're feeding sugar syrup, the bees use the sugar syrup and put it in cells. You don't want sugar syrup in your table honey. There's a lot of resources available during the nectar flow. So you stop feeding and you just let them fill up your honey box and their honey boxes at that point. You're continuing your hive inspections, and you're not treating for varroa when honey supers are on. You don't want mite treatments in your honey. July and August, this is when you harvest your honey. It's a big to-do harvesting honey, but we're not really going to get into it for this class. Continue your hive inspections, watch for late season robbing. Robbing can be anything from other honeybees invading your hive because resources are scarce, to western yellow jackets. That's the real big pest for honeybees, is the western yellow jackets. You can also see larger animals running around trying to get into your hive. Skunks can be a major problem. Tack boards in front of the hive can actually really help with skunks though.
Bears.
Sorry?
Bears.
Bears can definitely be a big one. Hopefully they're not in your urban settings, but in rural settings, bears can definitely be an issue. There's not too much you can really do. Ultimately, if the bear wants the hive, it's going to get the hive. But a lot of people use height and hot wire and a couple different things to really help with the bears. July and August, you are treating for varroa and you're beginning your fall feed. Once you take that honey super off and you spin it for your own honey, you want to make sure they've got enough honey to get through the winter. So you're going to feed, and really bulk up their resources. In September through October, you're watching for your late season robbing again. You're treating for varroa another time. And as the rains begin, you're going to stop feeding your sugar syrup, and you're going to settle into winter. You're not necessarily stopping feed altogether, but you are stopping the liquid feed and you're moving into a solid feed. And then you're adding your winterizing equipment and moving right back into winter. Again, this is a pretty loose guideline. The months are going to change a little bit. The climate is a little bit different here and there. But this is a really basic guide to just kind of seasonal tasks in the apiary. Which hive setup should I choose? This is the most important decision you're going to make before you get your bees. Going back to the history slide, bees will live in just about anything. They'll live in a basket with dung as insulation. So make sure you get a hive that you're going to be happy with, that you're going to be okay getting into. There are lots of different hive options out there. So do a little bit of research. We're only going to be really talking about Langstroth today. And it's really difficult to change your hive setup once you get started. If you buy a 10-frame hive and you decide, oh, well, I really want an 8-frame hive, it's going to take a while to change that. So this is a pretty important decision. Weight limitations, your type of harvest, there's all sorts of things to consider here. So removable frame hive types. We're going to be discussing the Langstroth hive today. There are 2 different sizes. So we're going to be discussing the 8-frame and 10-frame hive. And literally the only difference is 2 frames. So they're going to be a slightly different width, but they're the same length. The flow hive, some of you may have heard of this. It's an adaptation of Langstroth and does work with Langstroth equipment. Just be mindful if you get an 8-frame or a 10-frame flow hive. Top bar and horizontal hives are similar, but they do have certain difficulties with them as far as feeding and treatment and honey extraction. Slovenian cabinet hives are absolutely fascinating, but I actually don't have any practical experience with them. Definitely take a look. There's some pretty awesome photos, a lot of really decorative Slovenian cabinet hives out there. And it's something to consider if you have weight limitations. If you can't lift that 80 or 100-pound box, the Slovenian cabinet hive, you open the door and you slide the frames out one by one. And then the German plastic hive, again, going back to the historical slides, bees will live in anything. The plastic hive is basically any of these hives, but in plastic form. So it could be cheaper, it could be more insulative, depending on which hive you're looking at, but it's a pretty wide range there. So you decided on what type of hive you want. Now, where do you put it? Have your hives painted, have them built, have them in place at least a month before your bees arrive. You don't want to have a freshly painted box because the bees are going to smell all that off gas and they're going to take off. So make sure your paint has had plenty of time to dry and make sure a hive is in place and ready to go. Consider how many hives you will have. One hive is okay, but I recommend 2 hives to start with as a beginner. You're going to be able to see the differences in the 2 hives. You're going to be able to work both hives, swap frames over, just kind of get into the swing of things. And if one hive dies, you've still got the other. So 2 hives is a great way to start. And really the management practices, you're not going to be spending too much more time with 2 hives than you would with 1 hive even. Hives can be marked, so bees recognize home. Bees are really, really good at recognizing patterns and numbers. There are certain studies, I'll have to put this into the slide later, but there was a study a couple years ago where honeybees can tell the difference between odd and even numbers. They used playing cards and then put a drop of sugar syrup on even cards and a drop of water on odd cards, and they'd see which ones the bees go to. They'd figure out the sugar syrups on the even cards and they'd go to that one every time. So kind of interesting there. So you can use lumber crayons, you can use decals, you can use paint, circles, squares, dots, whatever. Just make sure that the hive entrances have got a couple different markings at the beginning. When you are placing your hives, make sure you have southern or eastern exposure. You want to protect the hive from wind, so they've got an easy flyway in and out of the hive. You want morning sun on the entrance. That's going to wake them up in the morning, really bring them out. Early bird gets the worm, early bee gets enough food to make it through the winter. Hives can be placed side by side or separated. Consider when you're working the hive, you want to have enough space that you're not bumping the other hive when you're working one. So you can have them side by side, but make sure you've got them spread out just enough that you can work both of them. I usually work my hive from the back. Some people like to work their hive from the side. So just consider what you're going to be doing and how you're going to be getting all these boxes apart and back together again. The entrance of the hive, the flyway, should be at least 6 feet from high traffic areas and obstacles. They're going to just kind of disperse after this. You can use height obstacles, you can use blockages to kind of disperse them in different directions, but you want to give them a good 6-foot flyway before you really do any kind of management there. Be a good neighbor, make sure you're not working your hives to the point that they're getting really agitated. If they start getting agitated, put the hive back together, let them settle down, that kind of thing. Know your laws, ordinances, and restrictions. Nuisance laws, nuisance ordinances are the only laws applicable to beekeepers with 4 or fewer beehives in Corvallis, Fulham, and Albany. So we're really lucky to be in a region where there are no real restrictions, and we definitely want to keep it that way. That's all right. We've got 2 different box styles and many different names. So in the Langstroth hives, we're looking at deep hive boxes on the bottom here. This is where your brood chambers will be. You're not taking any honey from these boxes ever. This is the bee house. They are called brood chambers, brood nests, deep hive bodies, deep hive boxes, all sorts of different names. But ultimately, this is the area for the bees, not for the beekeeper. You still need to do your inspections here, but you want to make sure that this is their home and it stays a good, hospitable place for them. Up here, we've got your honey supers, your honey boxes, your western boxes, all sorts of different names here. But ultimately what this is this is the resource collection for the beekeeper. Or you can also leave one of these honey boxes on in the wintertime and have that as an extra resource for your bees. 8-frame versus 10-frame. As I mentioned before, the difference is literally 2 frames. The 10-frame, as you can imagine, holds 10 bee frames. The 8-frame only holds 8 frames. And there are certain benefits to each. The 10-frame box is the industry standard. It's going to be the most widely available. The 8-frame box is not quite as available, but it's really popular among hobbyists. It is quite a bit lighter weight. It's about 20 pounds lighter. So if you have weight restrictions, the 8-frame is definitely the way to go. And there have been surveys in the past that have shown that the 8-frame hive, for some reason or other, actually has a better survival rate than the 10-frame. So let's build a hive. I'm going to go through this part a little bit quickly because there is quite a bit to go through. So feel free to stop me if you've got any questions. As I said, the 10-frame hive is the industry standard. We're going to be building a hive that is a 10-frame Langstroth hive. So starting with the telescoping top, moving down to the feeder here. This is a Vivaldi inner cover as opposed to the standard inner cover you may see. Your honey super with your 10 Western frames inside, queen excluder, which isn't pictured here. The 2 deep brood boxes, 20 frames because there's 10 frames in each. Entrance reducer, screen bottom board, and hive stand. So basic functionality, starting from the bottom going to the top. The screen bottom board is going to provide extra ventilation. It is going to provide an area for debris to drop through, so they're not gathering on the bottom board. It also has a slit in the back for a mite board so that you can do a kill-free mite inspection. Your hive boxes are your brood chambers. This houses the colony. Your brood, your food, your workers, your drones, and your queen all reside within. So when you first get started out, you're only going to have one of these brood boxes. The bees aren't going to fill up the entire box. You're going to wait for them to kind of spread out. We're looking at the 70% rule here. Once about 70% of the frames have been filled by your bees, they've built up the wax, they've got resources in there, they're really working all of those frames. Then you're going to add a second brood box on top of that and give them some extra room. You don't want honeybees to run out of room because that's when they swarm. So make sure they've got plenty of space in here, but don't add your other box until you're about 70% full. Otherwise, you'll end up with a chimney effect. Say you first get your bees, you've got 3 frames of really worked frames in here, and you add another box. Honeybees naturally want to rise up. So if you're thinking a tree or something, they'll go up, 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 and they'll just continue building. So you've got your 2 hive boxes on there, and they're just going to go whoop. You're going to have all of your side frames completely empty, and they're just going to want to go up and not want to fill it out. So force them to fill out, add a box, they'll go up, and then fill out again. So on top of your brood boxes, you're going to have your queen excluder. Not everybody uses a queen excluder. You can use one or you cannot. I like to go kind of middle of the road. When I have a honey super that isn't drawn out, it's just full of foundation, no beeswax at all, I will not use queen excluder for about the first 2 weeks. So I'll encourage them all to go up into that super, start building, and then before they really get it all built up to the point where it's actually usable, I'll insert the queen excluder. What that does is the queen excluder is small enough that it won't allow the queen bee to get through, and large enough that it does allow workers to go back and forth. It does provide some restrictions, so honeybees are more likely to go up and down with queen excluder absent. You want to get them some interest in that box up there, so that's why I leave it off for a little while. I get them up there, and then, well, they're in the middle of a construction project. They're not just going to stop, so I put the queen excluder in and they continue building in that box. But ultimately, the whole reason you put it in there is you don't want the queen to wander up into your honey super and lay a bunch of eggs in your honey. Moving on to honey super functionality, basically just honey. You're expecting to have more or less nothing but honey in this box. They always go above the queen excluder, above the brood boxes, and below the rest of your equipment, of course. You are going to put your honey super on again when the blackberries start to emerge. This is really probably first or second week of June, depending on the year. Number of honey supers varies quite a bit. It depends on your queen's genetics. It depends on the strength of your hive, how many workers you have. It also depends on what's going on in the environment, how much nectar is out there to gather. Some years you may have only one honey super and you may not have it full. Other years you might do your hive inspections and realize, oh gosh, I need to add another honey super. In this photo down here, you see that there are multiple honey supers on each of these boxes. So this is a really good year. I've seen, I think, up to 3 honey supers on top of a hive before. So keep an eye on your honey supers, make sure they don't get full. The Vivaldi inner cover takes the place of your standard inner cover, which is basically just a shim. It separates your hive boxes from your lid, and it's one of the most important parts of the hive here. If you've ever tried putting your lid directly on top of your frames, you'll know how important this piece is. You've got full coverage on your telescoping top going over the sides to prevent rain from getting into your hive box. Once your bees have glued that on, getting it off is a real trick. So the inner cover is going to prevent the gluing of your top to your frames. And the Vivaldi inner cover is multi-purpose. It's got holes in the sides, so you've got extra ventilation coming in and out. And it's also a feeder box. So you add your feeder on top, you don't have to get into your hive in order to feed. The Vivaldi is basically the only way that I go. And then the telescoping top is simply a lid. There are several different tops out there. Some are decorative, some are really simple, and this is my favorite, middle of the ground right here. You want full coverage around the hive so you don't get any water in. The copper top is really pretty, but it's basically just decorative. So middle of the road, you're looking at this metal telescoping top right here. One thing to note, a lot of these telescoping tops have protective plastic on the top of them. So when they're in the store, they can get dust or whatever on it, doesn't ruin the finish. Remove that, it looks a lot better. Getting into frames. So there are 2 different size frames you're going to be dealing with here. You're going to be dealing with your deep hive box frames, your deep frames, and your Western hive box frames. You can't really move these around, ideally. Deep frames go in deep boxes, Western frames go in Western boxes. There are certain situations where you can fudge this a little bit, but you've got to be incredibly careful. A Western frame in a deep hive box is going to get quite a bit of bird comb on it. So that's comb that the bees build underneath the frame, and it causes all kinds of trouble. So make sure you get the right size frames, the right size box. Bee space. This is what put L.L. Langstroth on the map as the grandfather of beekeeping. 3/8 of an inch is almost the perfect measurement from where bees will not propolize or wax in between. So the whole idea of 3/8 of an inch is it makes a movable frame hive actually movable. If you've got the wrong measurements in there, the bees are going to fill it up with wax and propolis, and it's going to be a huge mess. It's still going to be a huge mess because bees don't read our books, but this is what put L.L. Langstroth on the map right here. 3/8 of an inch. I've got this funny photo on here though. Again, bees don't read our books. This is what's called cross comb. Every now and then, instead of drawing across your foundation, the bees will draw perpendicular to it. If you see this, make sure to scrape it off right away, because that if you allow it to continue, it just wastes a bunch of bee work and makes a huge mess. So you want the bees to draw on the foundation, not against it. Types of frame foundation. So if you're thinking of a frame like a picture frame, the foundation is what's inside. There are several different things that you can do here. The easiest is just to stick with your right cell plastic. It's durable, it's easy to use. The colors are for the beekeeper, not for the bees. So get whichever color appeals to you. I like to use black foundation for my brood nest because it's easy to see the white eggs in the black foundation. The honey super I usually use yellow for just because the honey looks better on a yellow foundation. The really cool thing about the right cell plastic foundations is if you've got a scenario like this photo right here where you've got fur comb going on all different directions, you don't have to throw that frame completely away. You can scrape the wax off and then have these draw right back on there. So reusable frames, really. These frames can be safely spun in a centrifuge. So if you are extracting large amounts of honey and you want liquid honey versus cut comb honey, this is going to be the frame that you're going to want to use because you can put it in a centrifuge. The frame will survive all the spinning and you can put it right back in the hive. Real wax is a lot of fun to use, but it has some difficulties, particularly for new beekeepers. It's very fragile until it's completely drawn from edge to edge. Does require assembly. If you're doing real wax frames, you're going to need to actually build your own frames. Extraction via spin is not recommended. In some cases, you can do it, but usually it ends up ruining the frame. Great for cut comb production, though. So if you see honey in the comb, like in stores, you can actually create that with your real wax. The real wax is edible. The honey is edible. All you have to do is make the timing perfect. You want fresh white wax for cut comb honey. So keep an eye on your hive inspections. Keep an eye on how fast your bees are filling those combs. And you want to cut that wax as soon as it is ready. Foundationless is something you can do here and there, but I don't recommend doing it very much because you're going to wind up with cross comb and all sorts of other issues. Foundationless, this top frame right here, it just has nothing in it. You might have a little guide along the top bar, but that's really about it. It's beautiful. It's wonderful to watch. It's a great learning experience to have 1 or 2 foundationless frames in here just to see what happens. But try not to do the entire hive foundationless or you'll just wind up with a frustrating mess. Drawn comb is a beekeeper's most valuable resource. So anything that is drawn is usable by the bees. The wax has been drawn out to the edges and the cells are deep enough for storage. Beekeeping tools. You're going to want the absolute essentials and worry about all the fun stuff later. So you can't live without a hive tool. The hive tool is just an extension of your arm. When you're in the hive or anywhere near the hive, you always have that hive tool in your hand. It should never leave your hand throughout the hive inspection. It unsticks and lifts boxes, it moves frames, it cleans propolis, it cleans wax, it does everything. Your hive tool should be really durable. It's going to get dirty, so having a second hive tool to clean the first one is sometimes handy. And it should be sharp enough to really wedge in between the boxes without damaging them. That's why I like the blue one here as opposed to some of the cheaper ones. The blue one is actually pretty sharp and it holds that sharp edge. Your smoker is absolutely essential as well. Some people do their beekeeping without smokers. I really don't recommend it. The smoke doesn't hurt the bees in any way. It will actually save bee lives and make you more comfortable as a beekeeper. It keeps the bees calm. It interferes with their pheromone receptors. If they're smelling smoke, they're not smelling alarm pheromone. So it's going to keep them calm. Use the smoke before you need it. You can also use it to control bee movements in a more meticulous way. Say you're putting your hive back together, you've got a whole bunch of bees on the edge. You could crush a couple hundred of them, putting another box back on top. So a couple of quick smokes will kind of move the bees away from the edge and back into the hive so that you can reassemble. It's a good idea to just practice with your smoker, get it lit, keep it lit, figure out which kind of fuel you really like. Some people like to use bark fines, some people like to use cotton. I like to use burlap myself. And in a pinch, I've actually used some old jeans and that actually works pretty well. Surprisingly, it stays lit really well. It doesn't smell too bad. It works out. So you can use anything to smoke or fuel. Apparel, the absolute necessity, have a veil. I don't care what else you have or don't have, but have a veil. I recommend doing the full suit as a beginner beekeeper, just so you can be absolutely comfortable. You can slim down later, but start out with the whole ensemble, full coveralls, veil. You want to have gloves and of course some really good shoes. Let's see. Social organization. This is kind of a fun one. And I'm just scratching the surface here. Particularly when it comes to workers, it can get really complicated and really fascinating. But in general, the queen bee is just the queen bee. All she does is she lays eggs. She can lay up to 2,000 eggs in a day. So she keeps pretty busy. About 2,000 eggs a day, mid-season. But she gets a 2-week party before that, so. Virgin queen will leave the hive on a flight, and she'll take mating flights for about 2 weeks in order to completely get ready for being in the hive the rest of her life. She fills up with usually somewhere between 18 to 20 drones is ideal. And then she doesn't leave the hive after that unless she swarms. The drone doesn't really do much of anything. This is the only male in the beehive. There are some times of year where there are no drones at all in the hive, so all females. And there are some times where drones make up about 10% of the population, usually in early spring and summer. But the idea with drones is they don't feed themselves, they don't do any resource collection. Their one purpose in life is to mate with the queen in order for the queens to expand the hive. The reason drones look so much different than the rest of the honeybees is the eyes. Drones have upward facing eyes because they are going to be flying below the queen bee. They're looking up for queen bees in drone congregation areas in order to mate. But it's kind of an interesting little fact there. Cool thing about drones, though, is if you're looking to educate people about bees, grab a couple drones out of the hive and just hand them around. Drones don't have stingers. They're soft and fuzzy. They're fun for kids to play with. And it's not going to hurt your hive to take a couple drones out. The worker bee does everything. Everything from feeding the young bees, to tending to the queen, to kicking the drones out in the fall when it's time to winter. They do all of the resource collection, all of the cleaning, all of the ventilation, everything. So your workers are really a really important part of the hive. They can't be anywhere without the queen because they can't actually lay fertilized eggs. If you have laying workers, you've got problems. So the queen should be the only one laying the eggs here. So different types of brood. Brood essentially is just young bees. It's important to be able to distinguish the difference between worker brood and drone brood. Worker brood is important. You want this nice even layer like you see here, few holes in the center. When you see drone brood like this, drones are larger than worker bees. So the cells are going to be kind of elongated and not quite as even and neat as the worker brood. It's okay to have some drone brood, but if you're seeing excessive amounts of drone brood in your hive, you know that you've got a problem. It could be that you're queenless, it could be that you're about to swarm. You shouldn't see too much drone brood in your hive. A lot of beekeepers will actually take their hive tool and get rid of all the drone brood they see, which is really not a bad idea. Drone brood is the breeding ground of varroa mites. Drones take longer to hatch than workers or queens. They have the longest gestation out of anything. So naturally, the varroa mites will gravitate to the drone bees because they get an extra cycle. They have more varroa mites on drones than they would have on other bees.
So when you see it, when you say using your hive tool, you just scrape it up? Or
Yep.
Okay.
So when you're removing drone brood with your hive tool in small amounts, just literally scrape them off. It's gross. So have some sort of receptacle nearby. Don't leave that in front of the hive. If you have a ton of drone brood, it's a good idea to have a couple extra frames on hand. Take out the excessive drone brood, put a new frame in its place, freeze it for about 3 days or so, and then remove it. It's really gross taking a bunch of drone brood out all at once, but if it's frozen, it comes out right away, and you're not dealing with a whole bunch of mess. A lot of beekeepers will use this as part of their integrated pest management. Actually, there is a special frame out there called a drone frame, and the foundation has larger cells than normal. So this encourages the queen to only lay drones here because the cells are too big for workers. So you've got a frame just completely drawn with drones. Once those drones get capped over, remove that, freeze it, and then you've just gotten rid of a whole batch of varroa mites. But timing is really important here. If you let those drones hatch, you're adding to the problem rather than taking from it. All right, getting into bee breeds. I'm going to keep this kind of quick. Again, bees do not read our books. This is a general thing, and individual queens are going to have individual personalities that they pass on to their worker stock. So a gentle Italian, normally very gentle, can have a couple of bad eggs out there. The Italians are the most common breed in the US. They're the bees that most of the commercial guys use. They have very large colonies, which makes them quite nice for the commercial guys. They have gentle colonies. They're easy to work. They're low propylizing, so it's easy to move the boxes back and forth. They're not going to be as stuck together as some. They do have high comb building, so really quick expansion, but they could build excess burr comb. So while you may not be ripping apart boxes with a bunch of propolis, you're going to be attacking the burr comb quite a bit. They're moderately hygienic, but they do have high drift. So if you've got multiple bee hives right next to each other, they're all Italian, every now and then they'll go to the wrong hive by accident. So if you've got a disease or a pest, you're going to be spreading it with everybody else. Carniolans are my favorite breed. They're originally from Slovenia and Austria. So their climates are a little bit more similar to ours than the Italians. They're going to forage earlier and on wetter days than most breeds, and on colder days too. They have a really fast buildup in spring because they're used to having shorter seasons. The brood rearing is dependent on available food. The queen will know when, hey, resources are getting a little skinny. She'll stop laying quite so many eggs. So this is handy when beekeepers don't have to feed them as much. Their numbers are a little bit smaller. They are very hygienic, have very few brood diseases. European foul brood has become more of a concern over the last couple of years. So this is a really important thing to note. They have little robbing instinct, which is kind of nice too. They're less likely to rob from other honeybee colonies. They're also less likely to build burr comb, in contrast to the Italians here, but they're high propylizing. So you're going to be ripping these boxes apart. Caucasian and standard survivor. The Caucasian are very similar to the Carniolans, but with slightly different genetics. They're beautiful bees. Even the workers have color variations. They are black with gray hairs. They have the longest tongue out of any of the bees. So they can forage on slightly different material. A very low swarming instinct, which is nice, especially for beginner beekeepers. And they have strong populations, but they can be a little bit more aggressive. They're not easy to anger, but once they are angered, they kind of stay that way for a little bit longer. So be really gentle with Caucasians. I've had really good luck with them. I've never really had any kind of aggressive instances, but just be gentle because they do have some breeding in there from some more aggressive bees. And the standard survivor, it can be bred from many different things. It's kind of the mutt of bees, and mutts make the best dogs. But they're bred for hygiene, low propolis building, high populations, low swarming instinct, and a couple of other things here. So when you get your bees, what form would you like them to take? Package bees are essentially an artificial swarm. These are taken from commercial hives. There's actually a video on our YouTube or on our Facebook page. If you look for it, should be one of the very top ones. My mentor, Fred Selby, where we get most of our bees from, actually shows you how to shake package bees. It's a really fascinating video. Only takes about 3 minutes to watch though. So package bees are going to arrive earlier than nukes. If you want to get a jump on things, you want to get started as early as possible. They are usually going to arrive sometime in April versus sometime in May. They are less expensive than nukes because you're not buying the drawn frames, you're not buying the nuke box. It's just literally a package of bees. So more economical, earlier. They're good for beekeepers who already have drawn frames, so the bees can immediately begin working. If you're a brand new beekeeper and you don't have any drawn frames, it's a little bit more difficult because the installation is a little bit daunting, I suppose. It's simple, but you are literally just dumping 3 pounds of bees into a box. So it can be a little intimidating. You also have to feed them really hard when you first start out because they don't have any other resources going. A benefit is they have no brood yet. Most medications for mites won't get through your wax cappings. So if you have no brood, you've got no wax cappings over the brood, and you can treat the entire colony at once. So medications are a little bit easier with package bees. They can be slow to start building population though, because they do have to put all the food energy that you're giving them into building wax rather than gathering resources. So it takes a little while to get them going. Nukes are probably the easiest thing to start with for a beginner beekeeper for a couple of different reasons. You are getting a jump start with some drawn frames. There's 5 drawn frames in here. You've got a loose laying queen and her colony. There are larger populations in nukes, and it's really easy to install because all you're doing is you're taking the frames from the nuke box and putting them into your hive. So there's no shaking. It's really gentle, and it's easy for new beekeepers to get this going. The nuke box itself can come in very handy too. The nuke boxes that we have here at the nursery are like this white one in the photo right here. They're corrugated boxes, wax coated, weather resistant, pretty tough. It's good to have those around for swarm catching. If you have trouble lifting your hive boxes, you can take your nuke box out with you, put a couple frames in there, put the lid on top so they're protected, and then you'll have an easier time moving boxes around too. I use mine as a toolbox even. So it's always good to have a couple nuke boxes around. And the bee nukes are going to arrive somewhere around a month after the packages. So it is going to be a little bit later. Swarms. Swarms can be kind of hit or miss. You don't have a guarantee of getting a swarm in a year, but they've got the benefit of being absolutely free. So the downside to capturing a swarm is you don't know where they came from, what they've been through. You don't know what breed they are. You don't know how gentle they are. You don't necessarily even know if they have a queen when you're catching a swarm. More experienced beekeepers can definitely do this. Beginner beekeepers can do this as well. Just do a lot of homework. Make sure you've got them really well fed. Do your hive inspection as soon as you've got them situated in place for a week or so. Make sure they've got a queen in there. Make sure you requeen. If they don't have a queen, they're going to need a little bit more attention right as soon as you get them. There are beekeeping associations that have phone trees for swarms. So Linvet Beekeepers Association, if you become a member, you end up wanting to get a swarm, you can add your name to the swarm tree list. If you get a call, they're only really going to be there for a day or so. They move on pretty quickly. So it's important that if you want to capture a swarm, you get that call, you go right there. It's something that you can't just put off for a day or two. Inspections and feeding. When you first get your bees, you're going to want to get them installed, get them fed, and then let them set for a little while, give them 5 days or so to really figure out, hey, this is home, everything's fine, nobody's getting into me and doing inspections too early. But you're gonna wanna make sure that they're heavily fed in the springtime. You want to feed them a 1-to-1 sugar syrup. And this is gonna simulate a light nectar flow. So light nectar flow says to the bees, hey, nectar's on, we got to start building some wax so that we can really start storing all of this. It's going to get the queen laying more, it's going to increase wax and brood production, it's going to get the bees out of the winter mode and into spring mode. Once you hit fall, your sugar syrup needs are going to change. You're going to be feeding a 2-to-1 sugar to water. So this is going to actually be stored in the cells. It's going to be for extra food stores for winter. And it's a little bit difficult to mix, but it's important to note that you don't ever want to boil any of your sugar syrup. That can cause some chemical issues that can actually do more harm than good. So you can mix it cold, you can mix it warm, just make sure that when you're mixing your sugar syrup, you don't ever boil it. Protein is extremely important. All of your bee feed is either carbohydrates or protein. So your protein is going to be pollen. When you're feeding your protein feed, it's a pollen substitute. And this is going to encourage your queen to lay. If your queen doesn't have enough protein, she doesn't lay eggs. So it's important to have this on at all times. A couple different proteins throughout the year. You've got your active season protein and you've got your winter protein. Winter protein won't force your queen to lay during the winter broodless months. Summer protein, you're going to want to keep on all summer long to keep her rearing plenty of brood. Question?
So you keep protein on when you have the super zone?
Mm-hmm.
And so with the exception of if you're checking and you see that they're not drinking their sugar water and that their protein is not getting, are you pretty much supplemental feeding except for when you have super zone?
So
for like sugar water?
Timing for feed. If they're not eating their protein substitute, that means they're finding protein out in the environment. It's a good idea to keep a small strip of a protein patty on at all times so that you can gauge whether or not they're taking it. So one protein strip is about 1 pound. You can slim that down to the point where it's just a test strip.
Sure.
Versus if they're actually consuming it, you'll put a whole patty in there.
Okay. But sugar water or sugar should be pretty much year round except for when you have supers on.
As far as feeding sugar, you want to feed your 1-to-1 sugar in spring. And then once your honey super goes on, you stop feeding your sugar syrup completely. Because there's enough food out in the environment for them to start bringing it in and actually gather honey for the beekeeper as well. So when supers are on, sugar feeders are off. And then as soon as that super comes off, you feed again. The trick is you don't want to be feeding sugar syrup in winter.
Yes.
You want to be feeding granulated sugar or fondant in the wintertime when it's too wet for them to consume it.
Okay.
Resources. A couple of cool resources online. You can check out our Facebook page. We do have our regular Shonnard's page and our Shonnard's beekeeping page, so don't get those two confused. We also have lots of resources. We're going to actually post this class on our YouTube channel as well. There's a lot of videos on there, so go to playlists and that'll make your search quite a bit easier. Looking for more information on Varroa and Varroa management, check out the Honeybee Health Coalition. We also have quite a few tutorials on our website. And I think I've got local beekeeping associations. This is a really important one here. Join a club. Usually most of the beekeeping clubs will meet about once a month. They have really informative talks. A lot of really cool speakers will visit the beekeeping associations and just kind of dotted throughout Oregon. You'll see lots of friendly peers. Lynn Benton Beekeepers Association is the beekeeping club that I belong to. There's usually somewhere around 40 to 50 people in attendance, so lots of people to talk to, lots of awesome speakers. Swarm phone trees are a benefit. So if you want to capture a swarm, be a part of a beekeeping association, they might put you on the phone tree. A lot of them have bee libraries, so extra resources that you can check out. Just lots of friendly people, and it's just an awesome place to go. As far as books, there's a lot of books out there, so these are just a couple of my favorites here. The Beekeeper's Handbook is probably going to be your best bet right now, just starting out. It's a wonderful resource. It's got beautiful illustrations. It's clear and easy to read, and it's also fairly inexpensive. So Beekeeper's Handbook is a great one to start out with. Once you get a little bit more in depth, you can check out The Hive and the Honeybee, which is absolutely fascinating. It doesn't have one author. It has, I think it's got 20 or 30 different authors, and they each write their own chapter. So their life's work goes into that one chapter. So if you're really getting into the meat of it, The Hive and the Honeybee is wonderful. Same with honeybee biology and beekeeping. Dewey Caron actually will be around at the beekeeper clubs around Oregon. And he's one of my favorite authors and favorite presenters. The Backyard Beekeeper by Kim Flodum is an awesome read. It's got lots of full color photos, and it doesn't only go into Langstroth beekeeping, it also talks about top bars and a couple different hive types. So if you've got your horizontal hive or your top bar hive, this is a really good read. It's also important to get into bee forage. So we've got books like this right here, Nectar and Pollen Plants, talking about what you can plant in your yard to be great honeybee resources. There are certain times, especially in late summer, where there's not a lot blooming. The nectar dearth is going on, the bees need some extra food. So think about plants that are blooming in those times. Garden Plants for Honeybees. This is an awesome read, but it's really hard to find these days. You might find it at a used bookstore. Cool thing about it is flowers by month. So say hellebores in February. It's got a chapter called February. You'll look at hellebores, and it's got a 5-star rating. How much nectar is going to be in this plant? How much pollen is going to be in this plant? So it gets a little bit more in depth, and it's a really fun read. But definitely branch out. Look at some different books. Get some memberships with your beekeeping associations wherever you might be. Corvallis, Eugene, Salem. There's actually the Oregon State Beekeepers Association as well. So figure out kind of what fits best for you. And if you didn't get enough of me, we've got Bee School coming up. So we've got lots of different presenters at Bee School with the Lynn Benton Beekeepers Association. This is coming up next week, February 24th. It'll be going 9 to 3. I'll be presenting residential beekeeping at the meeting as well. But good opportunity to meet lots of other new beekeepers, lots of experienced beekeepers. And again, you can hear me talk a lot more. I'm sure you guys aren't tired of me quite yet. All right, so that's about it right there. Thanks everyone for attending, and if you've got any questions, please let me know. You can open up your mics on Zoom if you'd like as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.